Hi, and welcome back to my channel. Today is the final part of Napoleon's Marshals. I'm very excited for this. The three last Marshals on Epic History TV's list of Napoleon's Marshals are Berthier, Lannes, and Davout. Maybe a little spoiler for my next video on a tier list of these top 10 at least Napoleon's Marshals. I think Berthier, Lannes, and Davout top 5. Right? That's just that. I'm not going to say anything more. I'm just going to say that. Alright, original videos down below. Let's go.
Terror belli, decus pacis. Terror in war, ornament in peace.
I mean, just to say this, it would be pretty cool to actually have, obviously, a replica of this, right? I'm just saying.
The words inscribed on every French marshal's baton. So far, we've met Marshals Perignon, Brune, Serrurier, Kellerman, Grouchy, Moncey, Poniatowski, Jourdan, Bernadotte, Augereau, Lefebvre, Mortier, Marmont, Saint-Cyr, Oudinot, Victor, Murat, Bessières, MacDonald, Massena, Suchet, Ney, and Soult.
Alright, Berthier.
Marshal Berthier.
No one else could replace him. Interesting. I believe Berthier was Napoleon's chief of staff, I think, which is a very important part of, you can say, the reason why Napoleon can use his brilliance in the field, right? Because Napoleon is brilliant in the field. He's brilliant also as a, you could say, politician and all that, right? But logistics, right? That's going to bog Napoleon down. He needs other great men to do that job for him, right?
Louis-Alexandre Berthier was born at Versailles, 10 miles from
Wow.
Paris. His mother served at the palace as a chambermaid to the future Louis XVIII.
That's pretty cool. Just here on seniority, 1 out of 26. Does that mean he's the oldest? I would think he's the oldest, right? Yeah, that would make sense. Okay, so he's the oldest. Makes sense. His mother was in the chamber there. That's pretty cool. Pretty cool being born in Versailles. Okay.
His father was a colonel in the Topographical Engineers, a specialist corps of military surveyors.
Okay.
Berthier followed in his father's footsteps, joining the Topographical Engineers aged just 13.
Wow.
He was commissioned lieutenant at 17. He proved a talented and diligent staff officer. 10 years later, he accompanied General Rochambeau to America as part of French support to the colonists in their War of Independence.
I'd argue the marshals that was under Napoleon, who fought during the American Revolution, maybe not the 7 Years' War, because that's a very long time, but, you know, and fought during the French Revolution, I mean, that's probably why they got further in the ranks, you can say, because you learned a lot during the American Revolution or Revolutionary War. Interesting.
And witnessed the British defeat at Yorktown. By the time the French Revolutionary Wars broke out, Berthier was a brigadier general with 25 years' service, who'd studied and given much thought to the problems of military organization and command.
Important.
A reputation for outstanding staff work meant his services were in high demand.
Yeah.
And he served as Chief of Staff to Rochambeau, Lafayette, and Luckner.
And why is that? Why is he important to be in a role of that, right? Even though you can argue he's according to the revolution, maybe the more extremist in the revolution, he's a sympathizer and all that, right? But they need staff officer, right? To lead, because it's easy to have, you can say, blind, willful soldiers to charge, but you need a leader and a person who knows where to put people and logistics and all that nit-gritty work that you never see in war movies. Typically you never see these small details about logistics, about ammunition, food, pay, nothing like that, right? On a large scale. But pretty cool he fought under Lafayette.
But during the Terror, ties to these politically suspect generals put Berthier himself under the spotlight.
Yep.
He was stripped of his rank and not officially reinstated until 1795, when he became Chief of Staff of the Army of Italy.
Ah.
A Chief of Staff led the Staff Section, which was responsible for turning the general's orders into action, by drafting written instructions which were sent out by courier, as well as every aspect of army administration, ensuring efficient movement and supply, and collating reports on the enemy, terrain, roads, and anything else that might affect operations.
I mean, that's very important things, right? You can say during World War I, there was a lot, especially on the German side, the armies and the soldiers had a lot more free range to do what they wanted to do, right? The storm tactics, right? A little later on, but you know. And again, that could be good, but you need to be able to translate the general's orders into something you can base your approach on, right? Which is why you need a good chief of staff. Okay, fair enough.
Berthier, building on recent trends in French staff practice, now developed his own comprehensive staff organization. He established 3 sections. His personal office or cabinet, mostly skilled civilian clerks who handled troop movements, transcribed orders, filed reports, and collated intelligence on enemy forces. His private military staff, made up of aides-de-camp, liaison officers and couriers.
Makes sense.
And the general staff itself, headed by the First Assistant Major General, also divided into 3 sections. The first dealt with additional troop movements, plus auxiliary services such as hospitals, military policing, prisoners of war, and security of supply lines.
Important.
The second section organized the army's camps and billets. The third section was the topographical section, responsible for maps and reconnaissance.
Very important.
The general structure of Berthier's system changed little over the next 18 years and proved uniquely effective at handling the challenges posed by a new era of European warfare.
You can say and argue that it was good that he didn't massively change the way he has his structure, right? He has his cabinet and all the people under him structured, but as the war progresses and your enemy learns something from you, perhaps you want to change something there, right? Maybe you have a lot of troubles with maps. Maybe fix that. Maybe he did, I don't know. Fair enough.
Its chief beneficiary would be the Army of Italy's new commander, Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yep.
Napoleon also discovered that his chief of staff possessed immense personal qualities, a heroic capacity for work, meticulous memory and attention to detail, and devotion to duty and discipline.
That's
Crucially,
good.
he had a gift for turning Napoleon's verbal, sometimes vague, commandments into clear, concise written orders that made sense to his officers and later marshals.
Wow.
Napoleon and Berthier established a highly effective working relationship, that would last until 1814.
That's very
It
good to have.
relied on Berthier's complete acceptance of his subordinate role.
Right.
He played no part in devising strategy and never challenged or contradicted Napoleon except on points of logistical detail.
That's
When
good.
a friend queried his devotion to Napoleon, who was an extremely demanding and short-tempered boss, Berthier replied, "Remember that one day it will be a fine thing to be second to Bonaparte."
Wow. That's true.
Berthier's hard work and brilliant staff system underpinned all Napoleon's successes in Italy and beyond. They spent so much time together, Berthier was nicknamed Napoleon's wife. He was personally brave too, leading an attack at Lodi and a cavalry charge at Rivoli. But his genius was for staff work and administration, not army command, as he well knew. When he briefly inherited command of the Army of Italy in 1797, he begged Napoleon to return as soon as possible to take over.
I mean, that's good. And some of these great marshals, the best of the best under Napoleon, they knew where their limits were. Like Ney and Napoleon knew the limits of Ney, sort of, right? Sometimes Ney got a little too far ahead of himself, you know? But it's good that he knows where his mind should be at, right? Fair enough.
Berthier played a crucial role in planning Napoleon's Egyptian expedition of 1798, and masterminded his famous crossing of the Alps in 1800, which saw French troops advance almost 100 miles through the mountains in just 8 days.
In 8 days?
The same year, Napoleon made Berthier Minister of War, putting him in charge of all French military administration.
That's
when
good
Napoleon
position.
proclaimed his new empire in 1804, Berthier was the first name on the list of new marshals.
I can think that other marshals or generals who didn't become marshals when Berthier became one, I can think that they don't see what Berthier does for the military or for the army, right? They don't see the logistics, they don't see the personal staffers that he appoints, and they don't see, maybe some do, but they don't see him translating Napoleon's orders into actual practical things, right? When the orders are vague, right? Because they are contempt. They say, oh, it's natural that we know the orders because, you know, Berthier translated them, but they don't have that connection of Berthier doing all that with his structure that he has. So it's probably some generals and commanders who didn't become marshals when he became one probably resent him for that because they don't see what he had accomplished at that time, right?
Seniority over all others. The next year, his role as Chief of Staff, or Major Général of the Grande Armée, was officially confirmed. In the fast-moving campaign of 1805, Berthier's system ensured Napoleon always had up-to-date information about the location and strength of his own forces, as well as the latest reports on enemy movements, from scouts, spies, and prisoners.
Wow.
Such advantages helped him achieve the stunning encirclement of Mack's Austrian army at Ulm.
You can say brilliance of Napoleon and Berthier, but also the somewhat incompetence of Mack. You can say that, right? And that just propels the surrender at Ulm.
On campaign, Berthier and the Emperor often travelled together in the imperial coach,
Makes
working
sense.
without pause. His workload was immense, but so too were the rewards. Following the victory at Austerlitz, Napoleon made Berthier the hereditary sovereign prince of Neuchâtel and Valengian, with an enormous private income.
Wow.
Over the course of Napoleon's reign, he received endowments worth more than 1 million francs per year from the Emperor, more than any other marshal.
I mean, that makes sense, again, because of what he's doing, because Berthier isn't only doing the things that his job is meant to be for himself, he does it for all the marshals under him and Napoleon, right? I mean, Ney, Davout, Massena, and Lannes, they all did the things that they did for themselves, for the soldiers to the left and right of them, for the army, for Napoleon, for France. But it was just that, right? But that's fair.
Yet Berthier remained a liability as a field commander.
Makes sense.
In 1809, Napoleon put him in temporary command of the army of Germany.
Uh-oh.
When Archduke Charles made a bold advance into Bavaria, Berthier's response was hesitant and muddled, and nearly...
Here is probably where, which Berthier and Napoleon knew, where he shouldn't be. And maybe here is where, if other marshals resented Berthier, here is where they say, you see, he's incompetent, he shouldn't get 1.2 million francs a year, right? But both Berthier and Napoleon knew that this wasn't the position that he was best at, or even great.
It led to Marshal Davout's corps being encircled. Only Napoleon's arrival averted disaster. Returning to his usual role as Chief of Staff, Berthier once more proved his exceptional talents, coordinating the movement of 200,000 men and paving the way for the Emperor's victory at Wagram. The title Prince of Wagram was added to his honors.
Wow.
The invasion of Russia in 1812 was a test like no other for Marshal Berthier and his staff. It required coordinating the movement of 500,000 troops, the biggest army ever seen in Europe, across a 400-mile front. A simple private is happier than I, Berthier complained. I am being killed by all this work.
Wow. Probably
by
true.
August, it was clear the Grande Armée's supply lines were at breaking point. And Berthier was among those who tried to persuade Napoleon to halt the advance at Smolensk.
Makes sense.
He was ignored. As disaster engulfed the army, Berthier continued to perform his duty. By the end of the retreat, he was marching on foot with frostbitten fingers.
Wow.
When Napoleon left the army to return to Paris without him, he wept openly. Despite his own poor health in the wake of the retreat, Berthier worked hard to salvage the remnants of the army and served throughout the campaign in Germany in 1813. By now, Napoleon's enemies had reformed their own army general staffs, partly inspired by Berthier's example.
Right, because a lot of the coalition's armies took Napoleon's core principles and used it for their advantage, which makes sense. And they also used Berthier's chief of staff structure, which makes sense again.
But neither Berthier nor his system was perfect. In May, a confusing order to Marshal Ney contributed to his late arrival at the Battle of Bautzen, and a missed chance to crush the coalition army. Berthier was also notorious for his jealousies and grudges. His pedantic vendetta against Jomini, Ney's talented chief of staff, drove him to defect to the Russians. Berthier must also bear some blame for the disastrous end to the Battle of Leipzig. He knew there weren't enough bridges for the army to retreat safely, but failed to press the matter with Napoleon.
I mean, just one thing here. If you get a major victory, and some parts is Berthier's accomplishments, he gets, some praise. Sometimes major praise. But if a disaster strikes, a lot more blame is on Berthier. How fair that is, I don't know.
When the only bridge out of the city was blown too early, 30,000 men became prisoners. Berthier continued to serve Napoleon faithfully through the desperate defense of France until the Emperor's abdication in April 1814. The restored Bourbon monarchy showered titles and honors on Berthier,
Makes
the king
sense.
even gave him an honorary rank in his own guard.
Wow.
Napoleon's return from exile 11 months later put him in an impossible situation, torn
True.
both ways by his sense of duty and loyalty. He accompanied the king on his flight to the Netherlands, but was treated with such suspicion by the royal court that he left for his wife's family estate in Bavaria.
Wow.
There,
That's where Napoleon needed Berthier at Waterloo. Or the preparations for Waterloo, I'm just saying.
a few weeks later, Berthier fell from a window
Wow.
and was killed. It was most likely a simple accident, though some
Really?
believe he killed himself out of guilt or despair.
Perhaps,
or, less
but
plausibly, was murdered by French.
I mean, look at that image. How do you kill yourself like that? Wow. I mean, perhaps it was that, but wow.
Royalist
Brutal.
agents.
Maybe royalists.
Napoleon had
I mean, you can argue because they did murder a royalist mob, did murder another marshal. I don't remember which marshal it was. Maybe leave a comment down below. I don't remember exactly which marshal it was, but he was assassinated by a royalist mob, right?
expected Berthier to rejoin him in 1815 and was scathing of his absence. I have been betrayed by Berthier, who was just a gosling transformed by me into some kind of eagle. But after his defeat at Waterloo, in which mismanaged staff work played an important role, Napoleon conceded, if Berthier had been there, I would not have met this misfortune.
True.
Berthier had none of Murat's glamour, nor Ney's heroism, nor the tactical instincts of Davout. But he was the indispensable marshal, whose brilliant administration and tireless work were the foundation for so much of Napoleon's military success.
I mean, Berthier is, I'd argue, the only marshal which Napoleon needed desperately, that compared to every other marshal, he was the only one that could do that job that he got. There was no other marshal. Maybe you can argue some, but there was probably no other marshal that could do the job that Berthier did. And at that level. And to that success. Even though in Germany, you can argue some parts of Russia, maybe. And France, perhaps. But, you know. Okay, Lannes.
Marshal Lannes.
He had truly become a superior being by the time he perished. Wow. I found him a pygmy, but I lost a giant. Gone too soon?
Jean Lannes was a farmer's son from Gascony, who quit his job as a dyer's apprentice to join the local volunteer battalion in 1792. Energetic and charismatic, he was immediately elected to be an officer by his comrades.
Wow.
The unit was sent to fight the Spanish on the Eastern Pyrenees front, where Lannes proved a brave and active officer. He distinguished himself in several actions and was promoted to command the regiment. Lannes was then transferred to Italy as part of General Augereau's division, where his bold, aggressive leadership won praise from General Massena and then a dago from General Bonaparte himself, who rewarded Lannes with command of a grenadier brigade in the army's advance guard. A month later, at the Battle of Lodi, Colonel Lannes was first across the river, leaping off the bridge and wading ashore under enemy fire.
Heroic.
At the Battle of Arcolay, he was wounded twice, but when he heard the French were retreating, he left the dressing station to lead a fresh attack, which probably saved Napoleon from capture or worse.
Amazing.
Napoleon later presented the flag he'd waved at the battle to Lannes, and a special bond was formed between them, based on mutual respect and loyalty.
Fair enough.
Lannes was promoted to Brigadier General, and in 1798 joined Napoleon's expedition to Egypt. He played a prominent role in the campaign, helping to suppress the revolt in Cairo and leading the assaults on Jaffa and Acre, where he was shot in the neck. and only saved from certain death by his men, who carried him back to safety.
Superficial wound,
perhaps? At the Battle of Abu Qir, Lannes' infantry worked with Murat's cavalry to inflict a crushing defeat on the Ottoman army. While recovering from his latest wounds in this battle, Lannes received painful news from home. His wife had given birth to another man's child.
Uh-oh.
He returned to France with Napoleon in October and divorced his wife not long after.
Fair enough.
When Napoleon staged his coup of 18 Brumaire, Lannes helped to ensure the army's loyalty. The next spring, Napoleon's army marched over the Alps into Italy. Lannes' vanguard led the way, and at Montebello encountered an Austrian force that outnumbered it 2-1.
Okay.
Lannes was able to win a brilliant victory thanks to crucial support from General Victor. Just 5 days later, his division played a key role in Napoleon's great victory at Marengo. Lannes never forgot a favour. He and Victor remained firm friends.
I'd see, or I would have loved to see what Lannes would have thought of Victor voting to execute Ney. Maybe he would be on that side to execute him. I don't know. But at this point, he looks like a soldier. He's at the front lines. He's leading the troops. He has some good friends like Napoleon, like Victor here. He has respect from Augereau, I think, and Massena. Fair.
But he also never forgot a grudge, was notoriously short-fused, and quick to perceive an insult. In 1800, Lannes remarried to Louise Antoinette Guernuc, daughter of a senator, with whom he'd have 5 children.
Okay.
He was also appointed commander of Napoleon's consular guard, but he was dismissed after General Berthier helped expose his mismanagement of the budget, for which Lannes never forgave him.
Wow.
In semi-disgrace, Lannes was sent as ambassador to Portugal, a short, eventful spell in which, against expectation, his soldierly manner won over Portugal's Prince Regent.
Wow.
By 1804, it was clear that all was forgiven. Lannes received news that he'd been made a Marshal of the new French Empire, and orders to return to Paris for Napoleon's coronation. The following year, he took command of 5th Corps of the Grande Armée, forming the vanguard for the advance against the Austrian army in Bavaria. Lannes had to work closely with Marshal Murat, a bitter rival since a falling out in Egypt, but they put their differences aside.
Good.
Together, they bluffed an Austrian commander into surrendering a vital Danube bridge by persuading him that an armistice had been signed.
Wow.
At one point, Lannes even snatched the fuse from a soldier's hand as he prepared to light the explosive charges.
Wow.
The day before the Battle of Austerlitz, Lannes' quick temper got the better of him. He demanded to fight a duel with Marshal Soult, who in his eyes had made him look foolish in front of the Emperor. Soult ignored the challenge.
Interesting to see if they actually did the duel, what would happen, right?
Battle that followed, Lannes' 5th Corps held the left flank against Bagration's attacks, later pushing forward with the cavalry to help take 7,000 Russian prisoners. After the battle, Lannes was infuriated that Soult, and not he, was singled out for praise by the Emperor. Within days, Lannes had resigned his command and returned to France. In 1806, with tempers cooled, Napoleon summoned Lannes to rejoin the army for the war with Prussia. Back in command of 5th Corps, Lannes was as active, aggressive and brilliant as ever. At Saalfeld, he fought the first major combat of the war, routing a Prussian division commanded by Prince Louis Ferdinand. 4 days later, at Jena, Lannes opened the main French attack at dawn, with General Suchet's division in the lead. For 6 hours, his troops were engaged in furious fighting for the villages on the plateau, until finally, the Prussian resistance was broken. By December, the war had moved into Poland. Lannes attacked a larger Russian force at Pultusk, but it was a bloody, indecisive affair. Wounds and fever then forced him to convalesce in Warsaw, and so missed the Battle of Eylau. That spring, Lannes resumed command of the advance guard, as Napoleon sought out Bennigsen's Russian army, hoping to force a decisive battle.
I mean, it makes sense that Lannes is on the vanguard, right? He wants to be in the front lines, he's leading troops, he's very determined. But he's also this kind of emotional guy that wants the praise from Napoleon for perhaps what he might be a part of a victory, but isn't the fully, what do you want to say, the victor, right? But okay.
When Bennigsen located Lannes' apparently isolated corps near Friedland, he attacked. He expected an easy victory. But Lannes, with support from future Marshals Oudinot and Grouchy, expertly used his troops to fend off the Russians, while Napoleon raced to join him with the main army. Lannes' delaying tactics allowed Napoleon to catch the Russian army with its back to the river.
Yep.
And inflict a crushing defeat. The following year, Lannes was ennobled as Duke of Montebello, and joined Napoleon for the invasion of Spain, despite suffering a serious riding injury en route. Taking command of Marshal Moncey's Third Corps, Lannes routed a Spanish army at the Battle of Tudela, sending the enemy fleeing in 2 directions.
Wow, look at those casualties.
He was then given command of the siege of Zaragoza. Spanish soldiers and civilians defended the city with legendary courage, but Lannes' leadership and methodical house-by-house approach ensured ultimate victory at a high price.
Look at that. Look at that on the right there. Crucifixion. Wow.
Even Lannes was left shaken by the savagery of the fighting, writing to Napoleon, "Sire, this is a horrifying war." Napoleon recalled Lannes for the war with Austria in 1809. His Provisional Corps formed the vanguard for Napoleon's 4-day campaign, a series of quick victories over the Austrians that culminated in the Battle of Egmont. Napoleon next needed Regensburg taken quickly, and so, as usual, he turned to Lannes.
Fair.
After the first assault wave was mown down, Lannes' call for volunteers went unanswered.
So he took a ladder.
He picked up a scaling ladder and shouted, "I'll show you that before I was a marshal, I was a grenadier, and still am."
Wow, I just got chills.
As he rushed forward, his aides grabbed the ladder from him, reorganized the men, and led a successful attack.
Amazing.
After occupying Vienna, Napoleon ordered his army to cross the Danube in pursuit of the Austrians. Marshals Lannes and Massena led the way across improvised bridges, supported by Marshal Berthier's cavalry. It was soon clear that Napoleon had miscalculated, and that they faced not just an Austrian rearguard, but the full might of Archduke Charles's army. Massena held the village of Aspern, while Lannes organized the defense of Essling. But desperately needed reinforcements and ammunition were held up, as the Austrians floated obstacles downriver to smash the fragile bridges. Lannes' old rival, Marshal Berthier, was placed under his temporary command. Lannes sent repeated orders for him to charge the enemy, in language that verged on an accusation of cowardice. That evening, the 2 marshals nearly came to blows. The next day, Lannes' corps led an attack on the Austrian centre, but was driven back by the weight of enemy fire. The French-held villages were under constant, pulverizing bombardment. Around 4 p.m, Lannes' old friend, General Pouzet, was hit by a cannonball and killed in front of him. Lannes, badly shaken, walked off to sit alone for a moment, when a cannonball skipped along the ground and smashed both his legs. Lannes was carried to the rear and placed in the care of the Grande Armée's most famous surgeon, Baron Larrey. Larrey quickly decided that he must amputate one leg. The operation went well, but the wound became infected, and
Oh,
Lannes
no.
died 9 days later.
Wow.
Napoleon, who had visited Lannes every day, wept at news of his death. What
Wow.
a loss for France, and for me.
Yeah, fair.
Then he wrote to Lannes' wife, "The Marshal has died this morning of the wounds he received on the field of honor. My pain equals yours. I lost the most distinguished general in my army and a companion in arms for 16 years, whom I considered my best friend."
So up to this point, he says Lannes is his most distinguished general in his army. That's his words. Fair enough.
Marshal Lannes' death was a great blow to Napoleon and the army.
Yep.
He had proved himself an outstanding commander, as brave as Ney, with the military mind of Soult, the marshal who led Napoleon's vanguard in 4 of his greatest campaigns.
Yep.
His remarkable soldiering skills would be sorely missed by the Emperor in the challenging years that lay ahead.
That's fair, but also because he died technically early on, although he wasn't, but let's say early on, his name and what he did and what he could have done has got a life of its own, really, right? But it's fair. And that Lannes, best friend or friend, died of a cannonball, and then he went and sit by a tree, and then he himself got shot by a cannonball bouncing on the ground and smashed his legs. Wow. Poetic, perhaps?
1.
Okay, Davout.
Marshal Davout.
Davout was one of the purest glories of France.
Louis-Nicolas Davout was born into a noble family from Burgundy, with a tradition
Wow.
of military service that went back to the Crusades.
Wow.
At 15, he was sent to the military school in Paris, just missing a young Napoleon Bonaparte, who'd graduated a few weeks before.
Look at that.
In 1788, Davout was commissioned into the Royal Champagne Cavalry Regiment. But within a year, his vocal support for the French Revolution had got him into deep trouble. He was forced to resign his commission and spent 6 weeks in prison. In 1791, Davout joined a local volunteer battalion and was elected its deputy commander.
Okay.
The next year, France was at war with Austria and Prussia, and Davout soon proved himself a brave, highly organized and energetic officer.
Look at their faces.
He also won praise for attempting to prevent his commanding officer, General Dumouriez, defecting to the Austrians, though he was not successful.
Wow.
The incident did speed Davout's promotion to brigadier general.
Right.
But the revolution was now entering its most extreme phase.
Yep.
A new law barred ex-aristocrats from the army, and Davout had to resign his commission once more. A year passed before he was reinstated, with command of a cavalry brigade in the army of the Moselle. He led a series of daring operations against the Austrians, winning particular praise from General Desaix, who became a close friend. In 1798, Desaix introduced Davout to his friend, General Bonaparte.
Wow.
Napoleon was not at first impressed. Davout was aloof, untidy and awkward. Napoleon even described him as a damn brute.
Wow.
But he did trust Desaix's judgment, and gave Davout a command in his army bound for Egypt. It was a tough campaign for Davout, who caught dysentery in Cairo.
Oof.
But he further demonstrated his military skill, winning a series of skirmishes on Desaix's expedition into Upper Egypt.
Yep.
And later leading a successful assault on the town of Aboukir. Soon after their return to France, General Desaix was killed at the Battle of Marengo, robbing Davout of a close friend and patron.
Fair.
However, Napoleon had been won over by Davout's performance in Egypt.
Okay.
He now promoted him General of Division and appointed him Inspector General of Cavalry. Napoleon also encouraged Davout to marry Amy Leclerc, Pauline Bonaparte's sister-in-law, bringing Davout within the first consul's extended family. It proved a loving marriage and a great source of strength to Davout in the years ahead.
Fair.
In 1803, Davout was given command of the camp of Bruges, where troops were preparing for the invasion of England.
Oh yeah.
Here he established his reputation as an exceptional administrator and hard taskmaster, enforcing discipline and regular training, while paying attention to his soldiers' welfare and sacking officers who didn't meet his high standards.
That's fair.
In 1804, Napoleon proclaimed a new French empire, and Davout, aged 34, became the youngest of its new marshals. His inclusion was a surprise to many, especially as he'd still not commanded anything larger than a brigade in battle.
Right. Probably a lot of
resentment. It's very likely
resentment.
that the deaths of Davout's patron, Desaix, and brother-in-law, Leclerc, cleared a path for him. The next year, Davout's troops became 3rd Corps of the Grande Armée and marched east to take on the 3rd Coalition. On the eve of the Battle of Austerlitz, Davout force-marched his corps 70 miles in 2 days.
Yep.
Arriving at
And remember, Davout was a very crucial part in Austerlitz. Right? Because Napoleon's right flank could collapse right there, and then Napoleon would have been surrounded, even though he probably had success on the coalition's right flank.
Dawn on Napoleon's right flank. His troops went straight into action, holding off a powerful coalition attack, buying time for Napoleon's decisive move against the enemy centre.
Right.
It was a remarkable performance by 3rd Corps, soon eclipsed by an even greater feat of arms the next year in the war against Prussia.
And I'll argue Davout's victory at Jena, or Auerstedt, I think he was at Auerstedt, but Napoleon was at Jena. Davout's victory was greater than Napoleon's. I'll argue that. Put in the comments if you agree with that. I'm just saying, because Davout didn't get help from Bernadotte, which he would have supposedly had, right? And Bernadotte was nearly court-martialed because of that. Just saying.
As Napoleon concentrated his forces at Jena to attack what he believed was the main Prussian army, he ordered Davout's 3rd Corps and Bernadotte's 1st Corps to cut off their retreat.
Right.
But 10 miles north of Napoleon, near Auerstedt, Davout ran straight into the main Prussian army. With no sign of support from Marshal Bernadotte's 1st Corps, Davout's 26,000 men faced odds of more than 2 to 1.
Right, nearly 3 to 1.
Davout's masterful handling of his troops enabled 3rd Corps to repel the Prussian onslaught.
I mean, one part was Davout's brilliance, another part was Brunswick not using all his troops. I understand why you don't want to use all your troops, because you know Napoleon is there, or he thought that Napoleon was there, so he was cautious of Napoleon perhaps. So he didn't use all his troops. But then also Brunswick got killed or wounded. I think he got killed, so, you know.
Then, his line stabilized, Davout went on the offensive and routed the enemy army. It was a stunning victory, won at a high price. 1 in 4 of Davout's men were either killed or wounded.
Wow. Look at the guns,
when
150.
Napoleon heard the first report, he was incredulous. "Your marshal must have been seeing double," he told his aide-de-camp, making a joke of Davout's spectacle wearing.
Wow.
When the report was confirmed, he sent a message back to Davout. "Tell the marshal that he, his generals and his troops have gained everlasting claims on my gratitude."
Wow.
He later gave 3rd Corps the honor of being the first troops to enter Berlin.
Amazing.
The next year, at Eylau, Davout's corps again played a pivotal role, trying to turn the Russian flank. When his men were driven back, Davout rallied them, shouting, "The cowards will die in Siberia.
Oh yeah,
Brave
I remember that.
will die on the field of honor."
Right, and that battle or little skirmish, you can say, the slugging match at Eylau on Napoleon's right flank there was very tough, right? But he did it. He succeeded.
This time, Third Corps could not break through, but its tenacity helped persuade the Russians to retreat that night.
Right.
Following the peace treaty of Tilsit, Davout became Governor-General of the new Duchy of Warsaw, where he oversaw the recruitment and training of Polish troops.
Important.
In 1808, he was ennobled as Duke of Auerstedt. But
Fair.
for all his military prowess, Davout was not a popular figure. Notoriously tough, his troops respected rather than loved him, while several marshals were irritated by his air of superiority and blunt manner.
But I mean, air of superiority probably because of what he did at Auerstedt and at Austerlitz and somewhat at Eylau.
1809, with war looming with Austria, Davout rejoined Third Corps at Regensburg. When Archduke Charles advanced into Bavaria, the army's temporary commander, Marshal Berthier, nearly left Davout to be cut off. As soon as Napoleon arrived, he ordered Davout to withdraw. It was almost too late, but with immense skill, Davout and Third Corps were able to fight their way clear and rejoin the army.
I mean, yeah, just because Napoleon said, oh, Davout, you have to retreat to our lines, you're going to be surrounded, and he gave him orders, that doesn't mean they're magically going to just transport themselves to the French lines. Like, you have to act on the order accordingly, especially when you're almost encircled.
Davout played a major part in the counter-offensive that followed, known as the Four-Day Campaign, pinning Austrian forces at Egmul, until Napoleon arrived to deliver the decisive blow. A month later, at the Battle of Aspern, Davout and Third Corps never made it across the river.
Yep.
The Marshal's role was limited to trying to sort out the crisis at the bridges, until the French were forced to withdraw.
Important role, though.
When the army crossed the Danube again 6 weeks later, Davout was in his usual post on the right wing.
Yep.
On the first day of the Battle of Wagram, the Emperor criticized Davout for his slow attack. But the Iron Marshal, as he was now known, was saving his men for what he knew lay ahead.
Right.
The next day, Davout's troops fought off a major Austrian dawn assault.
Yep.
Then launched their own attack, gradually driving in the enemy left flank, helping to make Austrian retreat inevitable.
Yeah.
Davout and his corps had emerged from another major campaign as heroes. The grateful Napoleon bestowed on him a new title, Prince of Egmul. For a few years there was peace in Central Europe. Davout spent most of it in Hamburg, in his new role as Governor-General of the Hanseatic cities, cracking down on corruption and illegal trade with Britain.
Right.
In 1812, Napoleon entrusted him with the enormous task of organizing the Grande Armée for the invasion of Russia. Davout's First Corps alone was 72,000 strong, as big as Napoleon's entire army at Austerlitz. When it crossed the Niemen River in June, its troops were so well turned out that one observer compared them to the Imperial Guard itself.
Amazing.
Davout's giant corps was the spear tip of Napoleon's invasion. He mauled Bagration's Second Army at Saltanovka, but could not prevent its escape. 3 weeks later, his troops were in the thick of the fighting at Smolensk. But Davout's lack of allies among the other marshals began to show. Many were keen to see him taken down a peg or two, including Napoleon's chief of staff, Marshal Berthier, and perhaps even the Emperor himself. When Davout got into a row with Marshal Murat, whom he regarded as incompetent, Napoleon decided in Murat's favor, giving him one of Davout's divisions. On the eve of the Battle of Borodino, the Emperor dismissed Davout's request to outflank the Russian defenses.
Right.
"You are always for turning the enemy," he told him. It is too dangerous a movement.
I mean, that's fair, but also you can say Marshal Davout has gone over his head or something, right? But it seems like Napoleon, obviously here at Borodino, Napoleon sort of just threw his lines at the enemy.
In the bloody battle that followed, Davout's corps led the frontal attack on the Flèche earthworks. The Marshal himself was injured when his dying horse rolled over him, but remained on the field directing the attack, which was ultimately successful.
Ultimately, yes.
6 weeks later, the Grande Armée began its infamous retreat from Moscow. The remains of Davout's corps was ordered to form the rearguard.
Yep.
But he was criticized for moving too slowly. Near Vyazma, a gap opened up, and Russian General Miloradovich pounced. First Corps was routed, and saved only by the quick intervention of Marshal Ney, Eugène, and Poniatowski.
Yep.
Ney's corps took...
Maybe it's because of the injury. I'm making excuses for Davout, but I'm just saying.
...over as rearguard. But when he became cut off at Krasny, Davout was widely blamed for not turning back to rescue him, even though it would have been suicidal.
Fair.
The moment highlighted the gulf in charisma between a marshal like Ney, who was loved by the troops, and Davout, who was not.
But he was respected.
Davout began the 1813 campaign holding Dresden. But when Hamburg was raided by Russian Cossacks, Napoleon sent him north to organize the city's defense. Exactly why Napoleon kept his best marshal in Hamburg while a decisive campaign raged in Saxony continues to puzzle historians.
Yeah.
Davout was a stern and effective governor of Hamburg,
maybe resentment,
securing the lower Elbe River and Napoleon's strategic northern flank. He organized a new 13th Corps, and following Napoleon's defeat at Leipzig, withstood a 6-month siege.
I mean, yeah, Davout was basically just under a siege, put in there by Napoleon, and then the enemies came and surrounded him, right? Why would Napoleon put him there? Resentment? Maybe he thought Davout would counter-attack from the north when he won at Leipzig, perhaps? I don't know.
Davout only surrendered Hamburg in May 1814, after confirmation arrived of Napoleon's abdication.
Wow.
But what difference the Iron Marshal might have made at Bautzen, Dennewitz, Leipzig or Long remains a tantalizing what-if.
True.
Davout was not welcomed into the restored Bourbon regime
like
other marshals. His loyalty to Napoleon was despised by the ultra-royalists. Instead, he was forced into retirement and put under police surveillance. When Napoleon returned to France in 1815, Davout and Lefebvre were the only marshals waiting to greet him at the Tuileries Palace.
Interesting.
But once again, Napoleon gave Davout a role which, in hindsight, seems a disastrous waste of his ability. Davout...
I mean, it seems like later on Napoleon doesn't really care about it. He has more of a mind of what the royalists have, right? Put in place the people he likes more than the merits of their abilities, perhaps, right?
Davout was made Minister of War and Governor of Paris. Vital roles requiring a brilliant and loyal administrator.
True.
And Davout worked miracles to raise a new army for Napoleon's final campaign.
True.
But if Davout, not Grouchy, had commanded the Emperor's right wing in 1815, who knows what might have been.
Right.
Following the Emperor's defeat at Waterloo, Davout organized the defense of Paris and urged Napoleon to fight on. Later accepting that he must abdicate, Davout ensured Napoleon's safe passage to the coast and submitted to the Bourbons.
Wow.
The royalists had promised Davout that his officers would not be prosecuted for their conduct. He was furious to discover these assurances would not be honored.
Yeah.
He also testified on behalf of Marshal Ney, but could not save him from a firing squad.
Wow.
Davout was stripped of his rank and income, though they were restored 2 years later thanks to the intercession of Marshal MacDonald.
Okay.
Davout shunned court, as he always had. His health
Fair.
was failing, and in 1821, the death of his eldest daughter left him grief-stricken.
Wow.
He died 2 years later of tuberculosis, aged 53.
Probably, arguably from Russia, and the injury from Russia, right? Probably.
Davout, the youngest and least proven of Napoleon's marshals, proved the most capable of all.
Fair.
Cool under fire and a brilliant tactician, he was the ideal corps commander in battle.
Yep.
A superb administrator, he was a stern and loyal deputy for the Emperor in Poland and Germany.
Yeah.
His main weakness was his severe and blunt manner, which won few friends and left some even wishing to see him fail.
Yep.
Not something they saw from the Iron Marshal very often.
Haha.
So concludes our ranking of Napoleon's marshals. 26 dramatic lives that reflect a tumultuous age. Products of a military meritocracy forged in the French Revolution. Skills honed by 2 decades of war. Their fates entwined in the rise and fall of empires.
Yes.
History may never see such an extraordinary, diverse and colourful collection of military commanders again.
This is true. This is true. I'll argue that even under Caesar, Alexander the Great, Frederick the Great, whomever, you don't really know that many generals under them, right? Perhaps under Caesar you know of Mark Antony, right? Under Alexander Great you know, I don't remember what he's called, but he had a good general under him, or very good. But that's about it, right? Obviously, these characters, a lot of them are larger than life, although some are not. I'd argue Davout is not a larger than life character. Perhaps his victories and achievements are larger than life, but the person, I don't think so. Alright, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.